In a quiet little village surrounded by green hills and thick forests, there lived a young woman whose spirit was as wild as the wind. Her name was Aisha, and she was known not just for her kindness, but also for her long, beautiful hair that shimmered like silk under the sun. In her culture, hair wasn't just something you styled, it carried meaning. It was a symbol of identity, pride, and even strength. For Aisha, it was part of who she was. Life in the village wasn't easy. The fields needed tending, the animals required care, and every day brought new challenges. But Aisha didn't mind the hard work. She loved helping her mother, who had been raising her alone ever since her father passed away years ago. Together, they worked tirelessly on their small farm, growing crops to feed themselves and selling whatever extra they could at the market. Despite their struggles, laughter often filled their home. Aisha dreamed of leaving the village one day, exploring places beyond the horizon and making a difference in the world. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, everything changed. The peace of the village was shattered when a group of armed rebels stormed in without warning. These men were ruthless, feared across the region for their cruelty. They accused the villagers of secretly supporting government forces, something no one in the village had anything to do with. The accusations were lies, but truth didn't matter to these men. All that mattered to them was power. The leader of the rebels, a tall man with cold eyes, demanded answers. When none came, he decided to make an example out of someone. That someone was Aisha. Without hesitation, they dragged her into the middle of the village square. Her heart raced as fear gripped her chest. She tried to fight back, screaming for help, but her cries fell on deaf ears. Villagers looked on in horror, too scared to intervene. Then came the cruelest blow. One of the rebels pulled out a knife and began cutting off her precious hair. Each snip felt like a stab to her soul. By the time they were done, her head was shaved clean, and her once flowing locks lay scattered on the ground. The rebels laughed, mocking her tears and calling her names. To them, it was entertainment. To Aisha, it was humiliation beyond measure. As the rebels finally left, taking whatever food and supplies they could find, the village remained eerily silent. Aisha sat on the dirt road, clutching her knees to her chest, feeling exposed and broken. How could this happen? What had she done to deserve such cruelty? Her mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her trembling daughter. "You're still my brave girl," she whispered through tears. But those words, though meant to comfort, couldn't erase the pain. For days, Aisha refused to leave the house. She covered her head with scarves, avoiding the pitying glances of neighbors. Every mirror reminded her of what she'd lost. Not just her hair, but a piece of herself. Nights were the hardest. Sleep evaded her as memories of that night replayed, over and over in her mind. Yet amidst the darkness, something stirred within her. A tiny spark of defiance flickered to life. Aisha started hearing stories about people standing up against the rebels. Brave individuals were fighting back, refusing to live in fear. At first, she dismissed them as foolish. What could ordinary people do against such brutality? But then Malik, her childhood friend, paid her a visit. He had joined the resistance, a group determined to take down the rebels and restore justice. His eyes burned with passion as he spoke about their mission. "We can't let them win, Aisha," he said firmly. "If we don't fight, who will?" Malik's words lingered in her mind long after he left. Could she really rise above what had happened to her? Could she turn her pain into purpose? The idea seemed impossible, yet strangely appealing. Slowly, the spark inside her grew brighter. Maybe she couldn't undo what had been done, but she could decide how it shaped her future. And deep down, she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let those cruel men define her anymore. That night, as she stared at the stars through her window, Aisha made a decision. She would fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered because of the rebels. Little did she know this choice would set her on a path she could never have imagined. In the days following the attack, Aisha's life felt like it had been turned upside down. The vibrant, hopeful young woman who once laughed freely and dreamed of adventures beyond the hills now found herself trapped in a fog of sadness and anger. Her reflection in the cracked mirror was unrecognizable, not just because of her shaved head, but because of the emptiness in her eyes. She spent hours sitting by the window, staring at the fields she used to tend with so much energy, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. Her mother tried her best to lift her spirits. "You're stronger than you think," she would say, placing a comforting hand on Aisha's shoulder. But even her kind words couldn't pierce through the heavy cloud that hung over Aisha's heart. The villagers, too, avoided mentioning what had happened, unsure of how to help. They brought food to the house and whispered prayers for her recovery, but their pity only made Aisha feel more isolated. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted answers. Why had this happened to her? And more importantly, what could she do about it? One afternoon, as Aisha sat under the shade of an old mango tree, Malik appeared. He had always been like an older brother to her, someone she looked up to, someone who believed in her even when she doubted herself. This time, though, he wasn't there to check on her well-being. His face was serious, his voice firm. "Aisha," he began, sitting beside her, "I know you've been through something terrible. I can't even imagine how hard it must be. But I need you to listen to me." He went on to tell her about the resistance, a group of ordinary people coming together to fight back against the rebels. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, they were all united by one goal: to reclaim their freedom and protect their communities. Malik explained how they carried out secret missions, sabotaging the rebels' supplies and spreading hope among those living in fear. It wasn't easy, he admitted, and danger lurked around every corner, but it was worth it. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," he said. "We're fighting for everyone who's suffered like you have." At first, Aisha shook her head. "What can I possibly do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm no warrior, I'm just broken." Malik leaned closer, his gaze steady. "That's where you're wrong," he replied. "The strongest warriors aren't the ones who've never fallen. They're the ones who get back up after being knocked down. You've already shown incredible strength just by surviving what happened to you. Imagine what you could do if you channeled that strength into something bigger." His words struck a chord deep within her. For weeks, Aisha had let her pain consume her, convincing herself that she was powerless. But hearing Malik talk about the resistance ignited something inside her, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could turn her suffering into something meaningful. Still, doubt lingered. Could she really step into a world of danger and uncertainty? Was she ready to face the very people who had hurt her? That night, sleep eluded her once again. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Malik's words in her mind. Slowly, the doubts began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of determination. She thought about her mother, whose resilience had inspired her throughout her life. She thought about the villagers who lived in constant fear of another attack, and she thought about herself, the girl who had once dreamed of making a difference in the world. Maybe this was her chance to do exactly that. By morning, her decision was clear: she would join the resistance, not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had. With newfound resolve, Aisha packed a small bag with essentials, a change of clothes, some dried food, and a scarf to cover her head. Saying goodbye to her mother was the hardest part. Tears streamed down both their faces as Aisha hugged her tightly. "I'll come back," she promised, though she wasn't sure if she truly believed it. The journey to the resistance camp was long and exhausting. Aisha walked for miles, navigating narrow paths through dense forests and crossing rivers that soaked her shoes. Along the way, she encountered reminders of the rebels' brutality: burnt homes, abandoned villages, and frightened faces peering out from behind makeshift shelters. Each sight fueled her determination to keep going. When she finally reached the camp hidden high in the mountains, she was greeted with skepticism. The fighters were hardened men and women, scarred by battles and weary from years of struggle. To them, Aisha was just a scared girl with no experience, but she refused to let their judgment discourage her. Instead, she threw herself into training, pushing her body to its limits. Every bruise, every ache, every drop of sweat became a testament to her commitment. As weeks turned into months, Aisha transformed. She learned how to hold a weapon, how to move silently through the forest, and how to think strategically during missions. Her bald head, once a symbol of shame, became a badge of honor among her fellow fighters. They started calling her the Bald Warrior, a nickname that made her smile despite everything she had been through. Even the toughest veterans began to respect her, not just for her skills, but for her through it all. Aisha clung to one thought. She wasn't doing this for herself. She was doing it for every person who had ever felt powerless, for every child, Robbie. Aisha's days at the resistance camp quickly fell into a rhythm. Wake before sunrise, train until her muscles burned, eat sparingly, and then train some more. It wasn't easy. Most of the fighters were older than her, their bodies hardened by years of struggle. They moved with confidence, their every step deliberate, while Aisha often stumbled or hesitated. But she refused to give up. Each mistake was a lesson, each failure a stepping stone toward becoming stronger. The first few weeks were brutal. Her hands blistered from gripping weapons too tightly, her legs ached from running drills, and her mind struggled to grasp the complexities of strategy meetings. The other fighters weren't exactly welcoming either. Some mocked her quietly, whispering that she wouldn't last long. Others simply ignored her, treating her like an outsider who didn't belong. Aisha heard it all but chose not to let it break her spirit. Instead, she used their doubt as fuel to push herself harder. One day, during hand-to-hand combat practice, Aisha faced off against one of the toughest fighters in the group, a wiry woman named Rani, known for her speed and precision. Rani circled, Aisha like a predator sizing up its prey, her movements sharp and calculated. "You sure you're ready for this?" Rani taunted, smirking. Aisha clenched her fists, her heart pounding. She knew Rani was testing her, not just physically, but mentally. The moment the fight began, Aisha felt overwhelmed. Rani's strikes came fast and relentless, forcing her to stumble backward. Pain shot through her side as one punch landed squarely on her ribs. For a split second, Aisha considered giving up. But then something inside her snapped. She thought about the rebels who had humiliated her, the villagers who lived in fear, and the countless lives destroyed by cruelty. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who couldn't. With renewed determination, Aisha steadied herself. She focused on Rani's movements, anticipating her next attack. When the opportunity came, Aisha struck back, not wildly, but with purpose. Her fist connected with Rani's shoulder, knocking her off balance. The crowd of fighters watching erupted into cheers, their skepticism melting away. Even Rani cracked a grin as she helped Aisha to her feet. "Not bad," she admitted, slapping her on the back. "Maybe you'll make it after all." That moment marked a turning point for Aisha. Slowly but surely, she earned the respect of her peers. They began including her in planning sessions, trusting her input during missions and relying on her quick thinking in tense situations. What started as pity turned into admiration. Her bald head, once a source of shame, became a symbol of resilience. Fighters joked that she looked fiercer without hair, calling her the lioness behind her back. Aisha laughed along with them, though deep down she knew the nickname carried weight. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. But training wasn't the only challenge Aisha faced. Living in the mountains meant enduring harsh conditions. Nights were bitterly cold and food supplies were scarce. The fighters shared what little they had, passing around bowls of stew made from whatever roots and herbs they could scavenge. Aisha learned to appreciate the simplicity of these meals, finding comfort in the camaraderie they fostered. Around 4, the fire each evening, stories were exchanged. Tales of lost loved ones, narrow escapes, and small victories against the rebels. These moments reminded Aisha why she was here. She wasn't alone in this fight. She was part of something bigger. As her skills improved, so did her responsibilities. Commander Elias, the leader of the resistance, took notice of Aisha's progress. He was a grizzled man with kind eyes that betrayed his tough exterior. One afternoon, he called her aside after a particularly grueling training session. "You've come far," he said, handing her a canteen of water. "Further than anyone expected." Aisha lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. "But I need to know, are you ready to put your training to use? Real missions aren't like drills. Out there, hesitation gets people killed." Aisha nodded firmly. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. Elias studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good, because we're sending you out soon." Her first mission came sooner than she anticipated. The plan was simple: infiltrate a rebel supply depot hidden in a nearby town and gather intelligence. It sounded straightforward enough, but nothing prepared Aisha for the reality of sneaking past armed guards, her breath shallow and her heart hammering in her chest. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy, every sound a potential threat. Yet she pressed on, drawing strength from the countless hours of training. When she finally reached the depot, she discovered crates filled with ammunition and documents detailing future attacks. As she snapped photos with a small camera provided by the resistance, she heard footsteps approaching. Panic threatened to overtake her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Thinking quickly, she slipped into a storage closet, holding her breath, as two rebels passed by mere inches from where she hid. Time seemed to stretch endlessly until their voices faded into the distance. Returning to the camp victorious, Aisha felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd experienced before. The information she brought back allowed the resistance to launch a surprise attack, crippling the rebels' operations in the area. For the first time, Aisha truly understood the impact of her actions. This wasn't just about revenge or personal healing. It was about making a difference, no matter how small. Over the following weeks, Aisha continued to prove herself, taking on increasingly dangerous missions. With each success, her confidence grew. She began leading smaller teams, earning the trust of those around her. Yet even as her reputation soared, she never forgot where she came from, or the scars that shaped her journey. Those marks weren't just reminders of pain. They were testaments to her strength, proof that she had risen above everything meant to hold her down. And so, the girl who had once been broken by cruelty transformed into a warrior forged by fire. Little did she know, her greatest challenges and triumphs were still ahead. Aisha's first real mission had gone better than anyone expected, but it was only the beginning. The resistance leaders saw potential in her, potential that went beyond just being a fighter. She had a sharp mind, quick reflexes, and an ability to think on her feet. These qualities didn't go unnoticed, especially by Commander Elias. He began assigning her to more complex tasks, ones that required not just bravery, but also strategy and leadership. One such mission came sooner than Aisha anticipated. The Tiu rebels had set up a heavily guarded outpost near a river that supplied water to several villages. If the rebels poisoned the water or cut off access, thousands of innocent people would suffer. The resistance needed someone to sneak into the outpost, gather intelligence, and disable their equipment without raising suspicion. It was risky, too risky for most. But Aisha volunteered without hesitation. The night before the mission, she couldn't sleep. Her stomach churned with nerves as she lay on her thin mattress, staring at the stars through the cracks in the wooden roof. What if she failed? What if she got caught? The thought of facing those rebels again, the same ones who had once humiliated her, made her blood run cold. But then she remembered why she was doing this. This wasn't about her fear. It was about protecting others. With that thought, she closed her eyes and forced herself to rest. Early the next morning, Aisha prepared carefully. She dressed in dark clothes, tying a scarf around her head to cover her baldness. Over her shoulder, she slung a small bag containing tools, wire cutters, a flashlight, and a vial of oil to silence hinges. As she stepped out into the chilly dawn air, Malik approached her. "Be careful," he said, his voice low but firm. "These guys don't play games." Aisha nodded, giving him a small smile. "I'll be fine," she replied, though deep down she wasn't sure if she believed it. The journey to the outpost took hours. Aisha moved silently through the forest, sticking to shadows and avoiding open areas. When she finally reached the edge of the clearing where the outpost stood, she crouched behind a cluster of bushes. Her heart raced as she scanned the area. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their rifles slung over their shoulders. Inside the compound, she could see crates stacked high and what looked like generators humming softly. This was it, the moment she'd been training for. Taking a deep breath, Aisha slipped into action. Moving like a ghost, she darted from one hiding spot to another, staying low and keeping her movements deliberate. Reaching the fence, she pulled out her wire cutters and carefully snipped through the metal links. The sound was barely audible, but it felt deafening to her ears. Once inside, she pressed herself against the wall of a nearby shed, listening for any signs of trouble. Her target was a large generator tucked away in the corner of the compound. Disabling it would cripple the rebels' operations temporarily, buying the resistance time to plan their next move. Creeping closer, Aisha froze when she heard voices. 2 guards were walking straight toward her, their boots crunching loudly on the gravel. Thinking fast, she ducked into the shadows of the shed, holding her breath as they passed by. One of them paused, glancing in her direction, but after a moment, they continued on. When the coast was clear, Aisha sprang into action. She poured the oil onto the generator's moving parts, ensuring it would seize up completely. Then, using her flashlight to guide her hands, she tampered. As Aisha's reputation grew within the resistance, so did the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. With each successful mission, she found herself leading larger teams and taking on more dangerous assignments. The fighters looked up to her, trusting her judgment and relying on her calm under pressure. But leadership wasn't without its challenges. Not everyone in the camp was happy about her rapid rise. Among those who resented her was a man named Kareem. He had been with the resistance longer than most and prided himself on his experience. To him, Aisha was an outsider, an inexperienced newcomer who had somehow managed to climb the ranks faster than anyone else. Kareem didn't hide his feelings. During training sessions, he often questioned her decisions in front of others, planting seeds of doubt among some of the newer recruits. "She hasn't earned this," he muttered one evening while sharpening his knife. "Just because she survived something terrible doesn't mean she knows how to lead." Aisha heard the whispers but chose not to engage. She understood that jealousy and insecurity could drive people to say hurtful things, and she refused to let it distract her from the mission. Still, Kareem's resentment simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. That moment came during a critical operation. The resistance had received intelligence about a rebel convoy, transporting weapons and supplies to a major stronghold. If they could intercept the convoy, it would deal a significant blow to the enemy. Commander Elias assigned Aisha to lead the mission, knowing her strategic mind and quick thinking made her the best choice for such a high-stakes task. But Kareem saw it as yet another example of favoritism. The plan was risky. Aisha and her team would ambush the convoy at a narrow mountain pass, using the terrain to their advantage. Timing was everything. They needed to strike quickly and retreat before reinforcements arrived. Kareem was part of the team, and though he followed orders outwardly, his dissatisfaction was evident in his scowls and muttered complaints. On the night of the mission, everything started smoothly. Aisha positioned her team along the ridge overlooking the road, ensuring everyone knew their role. As the convoy approached, headlights cutting through the darkness, she gave the signal. The ambush began with precision. Fighters rolled boulders onto the road, blocking the convoy's path, while others opened fire from above. Chaos erupted as the rebels scrambled to respond. But then, something went wrong. One of the trucks exploded prematurely, sending flames shooting into the sky. It wasn't supposed to happen yet, not until they'd secured the area. Confusion spread among Aisha's team, and she realized instantly what had happened. Kareem had sabotaged the explosives, setting them off too early. His actions put the entire mission and their lives at risk. "Fall back!" Aisha shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She grabbed Kareem by the arm, pulling him aside. "What have you done?" she demanded, her eyes blazing with anger. Kareem glared back, unrepentant. "Maybe now they'll see you're not invincible," he sneered. There was no time to argue. Reinforcements were already on the way, and staying any longer would mean certain capture, or worse. Aisha rallied her team, urging them to regroup and retreat. Despite Kareem's betrayal, she refused to leave anyone behind. Together, they fought their way out of the ambush zone, narrowly escaping into the forest. Back at the camp, tensions ran high. When Commander Elias learned what had happened, he wasted no time addressing the issue. Standing before the gathered fighters, he fixed Kareem with a steely gaze. "Your actions endangered everyone," he said, his voice cold and firm. "Jealousy has no place here. We fight for freedom, not personal pride." Without hesitation, Elias stripped Kareem of his rank and reassigned him to menial tasks, a punishment meant to remind him of the importance of unity. Though vindicated, Aisha felt no satisfaction. Betrayal cut deep even when expected. That night, sitting alone by the fire, she reflected on what had happened. Leadership wasn't just about earning respect. It was about maintaining trust, even in the face of adversity. Kareem's actions had shaken her confidence, but they also taught her something valuable. True strength lay not in never being doubted, but in rising above doubt. Over the following days, Aisha worked to rebuild morale within the team. She held meetings, listening to concerns and addressing grievances openly. She acknowledged mistakes, both hers and others, and emphasized the importance of working together. Slowly but surely, the rift caused by Kareem began to heal. Even those who had once sided with him started to see Aisha for who she truly was. Not just a survivor or a symbol, but a leader willing to carry the weight of responsibility for the sake of the greater good. Still, the incident left scars, reminders, that the fight wasn't just against the rebels but also against division and mistrust. Aisha knew that unity was fragile, easily shattered by fear and ego, but she also knew that it was worth fighting for. Every shared meal around the campfire, every laugh exchanged during rare moments of rest, every story told under the stars brought them closer together. And so, despite the challenges, Aisha pressed on. Her resolve hardened like steel forged in fire. She carried the lessons of betrayal with her, letting them shape her into a better leader. The girl who had once been broken by cruelty had risen as a warrior, and now she stood stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The resistance had grown stronger with each passing day, but Aisha knew their fight was far from over. The rebels still held a tight grip on the region, spreading fear and destruction wherever they went. One name kept coming up in whispered conversations: her old village. It was a place she hadn't seen in years, not since the night her life changed forever. Now, it was under siege again, its people suffering as the rebels tightened their control. For Aisha, this wasn't just another mission. It was personal. Commander Elias called for a meeting to discuss their next move. "We've weakened them in other areas," he said, pointing to a map spread across the table. "But they're using your village as a base now. If we can take it back, we'll cut off one of their main supply lines." The room fell silent as everyone processed his words. Aisha's heart raced. She had dreamed of returning home, but never like this, not as a warrior preparing for battle. "I'll lead the attack," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Commander Elias hesitated, studying her face. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "This won't be easy. These are your people. Your past." Aisha nodded. "That's exactly why I need to do it," she replied. "If anyone should face what's waiting there, it's me." The journey to the village felt surreal. As they trekked through familiar paths lined with wildflowers and tall grasses, memories flooded back, childhood games by the riverbank, laughter echoing through the fields, her mother's warm embrace after a long day's work. But those memories were tinged with sadness now. The vibrant village she once knew was gone, replaced by a shadow of its former self. When Aisha finally stepped into the village square, the sight broke her heart. Homes were crumbling, crops lay abandoned, and fear hung heavy in the air. Her mother stood outside their little house, thinner and frailer than Aisha remembered. When she saw her daughter, tears streamed down her face. "You came back," she whispered, pulling Aisha into a tight hug. "I prayed every night that you would." Aisha clung to her mother, overwhelmed by emotion. But there was no time to linger in the comfort of reunion. The rebels were close, their presence looming like a dark cloud. That evening, Aisha gathered the villagers in the square, speaking softly but with conviction. "We're here to help you," she told them, "but we can't do it alone. We need your courage, your strength. Together we can drive them out." Her words sparked something in the villagers. They had lived in fear for too long, watching their homes destroyed and their loved ones hurt. Now, seeing Aisha, the same girl who had once been humiliated in front of them, standing tall and fearless, inspired them to believe change was possible. Slowly they began volunteering information about the rebels' movements, sharing hidden weapons they had managed to stash away, and even offering to join the fight. As the resistance prepared for the upcoming battle, Aisha spent hours planning every detail. She walked the perimeter of the village, memorizing escape routes and identifying vantage points. At night, she sat by the fire with Malik and other fighters, discussing strategies and assigning roles. Despite the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, she felt a strange sense of peace. This was her home, her people, and she would do whatever it took to protect them. The morning of the attack arrived sooner than expected. The rebels launched a surprise raid, catching the resistance off guard. Chaos erupted as gunfire echoed through the streets and smoke filled the air. Aisha sprang into action, leading her team with precision and calm. She moved like a storm, her every step deliberate, her focus razor-sharp. Behind her, the villagers fought alongside the resistance, their makeshift weapons proving surprisingly effective against the better-armed rebels. At one point, Aisha found herself face-to-face with the man who had shaved her head all those years ago. He sneered at her, raising his weapon. For a moment, hatred surged within her, threatening to consume her. But then she remembered why she was fighting, not for revenge, but for justice. With a deep breath, she disarmed him swiftly, leaving him incapacitated. The victory at the village was a turning point, not just for Aisha but for the entire resistance. Word of their success spread quickly, carried by messengers who traveled from town to town, sharing tales of a fearless warrior with a bald head who had led her people to freedom. These stories inspired others to rise up, swelling the ranks of the resistance with new recruits eager to fight against the tyranny that had plagued their lives. But for Aisha, the aftermath of the battle was anything but triumphant. The loss of Malik weighed heavily on her heart. He had been more than just a friend. He was a pillar of strength, someone who believed in her when she doubted herself. Now his absence left a void that no amount of victories could fill. At night, as she lay awake staring at the stars, she replayed their final moments together in her mind. "Keep going," he had told her. Those 3 simple words became her mantra, pushing her forward even when grief threatened to pull her under. Rebuilding the village wasn't easy. Homes needed repairs, crops had to be replanted, and wounds, both physical and emotional, required time to heal. Aisha threw herself into the work, determined to honor Malik's memory by ensuring the villagers felt safe again. She spent hours helping mothers rebuild their kitchens, teaching children how to plant seeds in the fields, and listening to elders share stories of resilience. Each small act of kindness reminded her why she had chosen this path. Not for glory or revenge, but to create a better future for those who deserved it. Yet despite the progress, challenges lingered. Supplies were scarce and many families struggled to make ends meet. Some villagers still lived in fear, worried the rebels might return. To address these concerns, Aisha organized patrols around the village, ensuring constant vigilance. She also sent messages to nearby towns asking for donations of food and medicine. Her efforts paid off when a caravan arrived one morning, loaded with essentials donated by neighboring communities inspired by the village's courage. As weeks turned into months, Aisha began to notice a shift in the villagers' attitudes. Where there had once been despair, hope now blossomed. People laughed more freely, sang songs while working in the fields, and gathered around fires to share meals. Children played games in the streets, their laughter echoing through the air like music. Even the elders who had seen decades of hardship spoke of brighter days ahead. It was proof that the fight wasn't just about defeating an enemy, it was about restoring dignity and faith in humanity. Still, Aisha knew the larger struggle was far from over. The rebels had retreated, but they hadn't been eradicated. Reports trickled in of their movements elsewhere, regrouping and plotting their next move. Commander Elias called for another meeting, urging Aisha to join him at the main resistance camp to strategize their next steps. Leaving the village behind, even temporarily, was difficult, but she understood the importance of staying ahead of the enemy. When she arrived at the camp, she found it buzzing with activity. Fighters from different regions had gathered, united by a shared purpose. They exchanged stories of battles won and lessons learned, strengthening bonds across communities. For the first time, Aisha realized the resistance wasn't just a scattered group of fighters. It was a movement, a force capable of toppling oppression if they worked together. Commander Elias wasted no time getting down to business. Spreading out maps across a wooden table, he pointed to areas where the rebels were amassing forces. "They're preparing for a large-scale attack," he explained. "If we wait too long, they'll strike first. We need to hit them hard before they gain momentum." Aisha studied the map carefully, her mind racing with possibilities. She suggested targeting key supply routes, cutting off their resources and forcing them to scatter. Her idea was met with nods of approval, and soon, plans were underway to execute the strategy. Leading such a massive operation required coordination and trust. Aisha worked closely with leaders from other groups, building alliances and ensuring everyone understood their roles. Late nights were spent poring over details, debating tactics, and addressing concerns. Though exhausting, these sessions reinforced her belief in the power of unity. Every voice mattered, every perspective added value, and every hand contributed to the greater cause. The mission itself was grueling. Aisha and her team traveled for days, navigating treacherous terrain to reach the rebels' supply lines. Along the way, they faced harsh weather, limited rations, and the constant threat of ambush. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. When they finally reached their destination, a convoy transporting weapons and ammunition, they struck swiftly and decisively. Explosions lit up the night sky as trucks went up in flames, crippling the rebels' ability to wage war. Returning to the camp victorious, Aisha was greeted with cheers and applause. Fighters lifted her onto their shoulders, chanting her name. "The bald warrior," they shouted, their voices ringing out like thunder. For a moment, she allowed herself to bask in the celebration, feeling a rare sense of pride. Yet deep down, she knew the cost of victory. Too many lives had been lost, too many sacrifices made. This wasn't a game of winning or losing. It was a fight for survival, for justice, for the right to live without fear. In quiet moments alone, Aisha reflected on how far she had come. From the girl who had once cowered in shame after being humiliated by the rebels, she had transformed into a leader respected and admired by thousands. Her bald head, once a symbol of pain, had become a beacon of hope. People looked at her and saw not just a fighter, but a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could prevail. And yet, with each triumph came a sobering realization. The fight would never truly end. There would always be new enemies, new injustices to confront. But Aisha accepted this truth with grace. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the willingness to act despite it. With Malik's words echoing in her heart and the love of her people fueling her spirit, she vowed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Because that's what warriors did. They fought not just for themselves, but for everyone counting on them. And Aisha? She was ready to carry that weight, for as long as it took. Years passed and the world began to change. The resistance, once a scattered group of fighters hiding in the shadows, had grown into a powerful movement that inspired entire regions to rise up against oppression. At the heart of it all was Aisha, the girl who had once been broken by cruelty, but rose as a warrior no one would ever forget. Her story spread far and wide, carried by songs sung around campfires, murals painted on crumbling walls, and whispers shared between generations. In villages and towns across the land, people spoke of the bald warrior with reverence. They told tales of her courage, her leadership, and her unyielding determination. Some claimed she could move like the wind, striking swiftly and disappearing before the enemy knew what hit them. Others said her bald head gleamed under the moonlight, a sign that she was protected by something greater than herself. Whether myth or reality, these stories kept her legacy alive, inspiring countless others to stand up for justice. But for Aisha, fame wasn't something she sought, or even wanted. She remained grounded, always remembering where she came from. Even as statues were erected in her honor and leaders traveled from distant lands to seek her counsel, she stayed true to her roots. Her days were spent not just strategizing battles, but also tending to the needs of those affected by the ongoing conflict. She visited schools built from rubble, comforted grieving families, and worked alongside farmers replanting fields destroyed by war. To her, being a leader meant serving, not ruling. One evening, as she sat beneath the same mango tree where Malik had first encouraged her to join the resistance, Aisha reflected on how much had changed. The scars of the past still lingered, both visible and invisible, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they reminded her of how far she had come. Her journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, pain, and loss that sometimes felt unbearable. But through it all, she had held on to one truth. Strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up every time you did. Her mother, now older and frailer, often joined her under the tree. Together they watched the sun dip below, the horizon painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "You've done so much," her mother said one evening, her voice filled with pride. "I never thought I'd see the day when our village and so many others could live without fear." Aisha smiled softly, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. "We're not done yet," she replied. "There's still work to be done." And she was right. Though the rebels had been weakened significantly, pockets of resistance remained. In remote areas, remnants of their forces continued to terrorize communities, clinging desperately to power. Aisha refused to rest until every last trace of their tyranny was eradicated. She led missions with the same intensity and focus as she had in the beginning, knowing that freedom couldn't exist while even one person suffered under oppression. But beyond the battles, Aisha dedicated herself to building a better future. She understood that defeating an enemy was only half the fight. The other half was healing the wounds left behind. With the help of allies, she established programs to educate children, train farmers in sustainable practices, and provide medical care to those in need. Villages once ravaged